I will now play a double role as both the moderator and one of the speakers. Let me, however, invite Aleksandra Kuś to join me on stage. She represents the Orange Foundation. Together we shall present the results of our most recent national survey, Parents and Children versus Internet Threats. This is a very new piece of research of this year. It has been organized and conducted by Orange Foundation in partnership with our foundation. Good afternoon. A few words about the study itself. It was conducted in April this year, and we contacted parents of children that use internet as well as children who use internet and are aged between 10 and 18. We conducted 500 direct interviews, and TNS Poland conducted the survey, and it was commissioned by Orange Foundation and Empowering Children Foundation. This is already the third edition of the survey. It developed over the years. However, the most fundamental questions remain the same since 2008, when Łukasz Wojtasik performed such research. They started with the parents, then in the second edition also children were surveyed. As this is already the third edition, we can already look back and compare the results as well as the trends that we have observed over the period of 8 years. A few words about the use of the internet. When we talk about how children use the internet, we think about devices. Studies show that mobile devices, and in particular smartphones, are very popular among children and young people. 61% own their smartphone with access to the internet. And as for the use of mobile devices, and what follows, if we have access to smartphone, we can presume that children use the internet more often for longer periods. Often parents cannot say how much time children spend online and where they go online. Many parents are not aware of the fact that children use internet using public Wi-Fi access. We also know that parents often, and that is 24% of parents, buys smartphones or tablets with data transferred. So they admit that their children use as much internet as they want and whenever they want, which means parents do not always know what children do when online. And something that has already been said today, very young children start their adventure with the internet. 24% of parents say that they give smartphones or tablets to children that are younger than 3 years old. And as for the use of the internet and the actual activity, social networks are the most popular type of use of the internet, but also searching for information and gaining knowledge. This is what children do when they are online. Online games, chats, communicators, this is what children use. And as for social networks, many children have Facebook accounts. We are all aware of that. Other social networks such as Snapchat and Instagram are also very popular. And more children than parents use these channels of communication. Parents use Nasza Klasa and Facebook.
Co warto powiedzieć, co nam wychodzi z...
It is also worth it to mention that there are differences when it comes to attitude towards internet. Children have a different attitude when compared to parents. Grown-ups find it very difficult to imagine a world without the internet. It is even more difficult for the children. They fulfill many of their needs using the internet. The internet makes it easier for them to make and establish contacts. It makes it possible for them to express themselves. What is interesting that both children and parents admit that they very often waste time using the internet. So it is well worth it to consider how to make sure that children use the internet for the appropriate educational purposes.
O samym korzystaniu z internetu.
So much for the use of internet as such, and let us now move on to the next part of our survey, which pertains to the threats. We asked both parents and the children, and let us start with the parents. What are their concerns? The very first association we make, or the very first comment that comes to mind, is that there is no one particular threat that is greater than the others. The very first three threats are very similar when it comes to numbers. The parents are concerned with potential addiction to the internet, making contacts with strangers, and contact with undesirable, dangerous content. There were also many parents that are concerned with publishing private data by the children, cyberbullying and sexting. 7% of parents do not perceive any threats. There is nothing that dominates here. We have quite dispersed list of threats. Something that is interesting, however difficult to interpret, is when we try to compare these results with our earlier surveys. It's quite disconcerting that when we look at data for 2008, 2013 and 16, these 5 types of threats, with all 5 threats, we have a decrease in the number of parents which are concerned with them. So, do parents consider this normal? Are they no longer afraid? Do they think it is part of the daily life? This is something that needs to be studied more in depth. However, when it comes to the addiction, we have a slightly higher result in this year's survey. And as for children, the questions were somewhat different, and similarly to earlier editions, children were concerned with hackers, viruses that can damage their devices, technological threats, and also the fact that their personal data may be stolen or their photographs may be published. Only later, and only 18 of children were concerned with strangers who might want to meet up with them. 16% were concerned with being attacked or abused. And there is 25% of children that say they have no concerns. This is a very high result. This is something which can be further discussed and considered. Is it good that so many children feel safe enough and they have no concerns, no worries, they see no threats in the internet? There are some positive and negative aspects of this.
Well, we've asked the parents about their children and about the experience. There's not much difference between the two, and obviously the percentages are not high, fortunately. like publishing pictures without permission. These are just a few percentage. This, of course, translates into a number of dramatic situations. Plus, more parents declared that children were abusing the internet. Then we should ask how they define the abuse of the internet. There will be a special session about that. And another result, we have to select from our results. We've been asking about certain risks and asked the children whether they would know what to do in such situations. About 62% on average decided to say they do not know, they would not know what to do. So they admit that if anything like that happens to them, they would not necessarily know what to do. And also some worrying results, and referring to what we had at the first session, 24% children declared that they are not able to edit the privacy settings, and 56% of children never change their passwords in social networks. And as we've already heard and clearly heard, the security of the password is one of the pillars of the online safety. Our third part in this research is the prevention of risks, because our foundations dealing in prevention, we pay much attention to the data. We asked children whether they had classes on network safety, and 47% didn't have or declared they didn't have such classes. In our previous edition, 58% of children declared they had such class. So we rather see this share growing. Instead, what we see is a decline. So we may say that a minority of Polish children had a training at school, and this definitely is not the situation that we would like to have. But we know a lot of you yourself run such classes, but there are a lot of schools where there is no such program at all. If not school, then who? So we asked whether parents talk to them. 77% children declared that they spoke to their parents about that, but still we had this almost 1/4 where there was no such conversation, and we asked also about the topics of the conversation. But this is the first stage of talking. But we've also asked whether the parents set the security rules for them or agreed with them, so that the children and parents have to sit down and agree the principles that would be accepted by both parties. And as you see, our society is divided 50-50. That's 53 children declared they've agreed the principles, but 47 failed to do so. So there is still a lot to be done. And when they agreed the principles, in most cases this was a time limit for internet use, and individual threats like contacting strangers, permitted services were much rarer provided. And if you then compare that to the previous editions, you see a decline. in the comparison between 2008 and 2016. So this was in the beginning over 80%, and in 2016 only 60%. There is a slightly different age group, but the data clearly indicate that the situation is worsening. And maybe this is related to something which Ola said when talking about the equipment, so the change of infrastructure and the way we use the network. So if we ask whether the parents control at all, in case of PCs and laptops, the parents' control was declared by 63% of children. In case of mobile devices, this was 1/5. When you speak of the game console, this was only 8%. This means that parents have much lower contribution to the control than in case of computers. Use of mobile devices among youth is growing, so parents should first of all control the length, then the type of applications, because we've already heard about the risks related to certain applications. So there is a challenge for the parents, what their children do with their smartphone, what data they publish, how much time they spend on the internet, because the privacy and the impersonal image in the net is important. We have a huge capital that 90% of parents are aware that it's their responsibility to take care of their child's security, and simultaneously a large percentage admits that they have sufficient knowledge about the risks on the internet, but 40% of them say that they are not as good in using internet as their children. And not having the knowledge of the risks, 55% of parents would like to learn more about the children's security on the net. So this is for us important information for the program Safer Internet, and for us the Orange Foundation. And I'd like to mention once again about the competition for primary schools, which is still going on. You still can register until the end of September. In your materials, you have a brochure with complete information on the competition. And I also invite you to a website of internet training. And also in the brochure, you will find the address to the internet training. So I strongly encourage you to visit that website. All right, thank you very much for your attention, and we believe that the data is important for this conference, because when we'll start digging deeper, we will have the base for discussion. So this is not the case that all our children heard about everything. There is still a lot to be done. Thank you very much, Aleksandra Kuś from the Orange Foundation.